Today, I'm planning to make a bit of a whiteboard video, um, hoping to produce a bit of a series where we're looking at how to set up your training and how you should be looking at making progress in the gym and setting up a long-term roadmap in your training. Now, whether you write your own training or you have someone who does coaching for you, these are principles that you can apply just to better yourself as a lifter. And these are things that you should look for to make sure that you have an appropriate training program. So today we're going to look at progressive overload and specificity within training, two of the most basic principles that should be at the foundation of any training program. So we're going to start with this idea of progressive overload. This should be one of the foundational approaches that you have towards your training. And this is basically concept number one of how do we get strong, how do we get faster, how do you improve in the gym. So to start with this idea, we have to think about what are we trying to do, right? And any time that we try and improve our body, whether it be in the gym, on the track, in sports, it all comes down to adaptations, right? You are trying to push your body to the point, basically, and if we put it bluntly as an example, it's like if you were a caveman out in the wilderness and you had a giant rock fall on you. And through adrenaline, you're just barely able to get this rock off before a lion comes along and eats you. And your body's like, whew, all right, we almost died on that one. We had better get stronger or better prepared for the next time that situation arises, right? Or it could be something similar to like running away from a predator, and your body's like, whew, we better get better so we can run faster next time because we were pushed to the limit. Now, that's exactly what we're chasing here. We are chasing adaptation in the body, and through that adaptation, you get stronger and faster, whatever you may need for your sport. So how we're going to do this is mainly through three branches, right? You can essentially add more weight to the bar, right? So as the weeks go on, weights progressively get heavier. This is a very common approach that you see. But you can also progress your overload by adding more reps and keeping the weights the same, right? So if I do 100 pounds for 10 reps, and then the next week I do 100 pounds for 11, that is still progressive overload being implemented. I think sometimes people get a little carried away with having to put more weight on the bar all the time. Understand you have other things that you can play with in this equation. And then finally, you can play with less rest between sets. So maybe sticking with the 100-pound example, do 100 pounds exercise for 10 reps, 1 week with 60 seconds between. And then the next week, if you're doing the same weight, 100 pounds for 10 reps, but maybe between your sets you take 30 seconds instead of 60, you are actually still progressively overloading your body, right? You're making it slightly harder so your body adapts. And a lot of times you see this kind of said in the bro way, confusing the muscle, right? Which is kind of funny. Muscles don't have brains. They cannot be confused. Sorry to break it to you. But essentially, that's their way of saying, hey, you have to change things up and progressively increase difficulty to actually make progress. Otherwise, you're going to stagnate because your body gets to the point where it feels sufficiently adapted to that stimulus. And it's like, hey, we're strong enough, right? We didn't almost die from 100 pounds for 10 reps. So we're just going to stay the same. And that's where people hit plateaus. Okay, so now that we've gone over the idea of, hey, what is progressive overload, I would like to go ahead and take a moment and compare and contrast the differences between the approach that a beginner should have and an advanced lifter. And that's going to circle back around to both progressive overload and specificity when we talk about that in a moment. So I've got a chart here just outlining some major differences between someone who has just gotten into the gym or a sport or a skill and someone who is advanced on this side. So one of the major differences here is going to be skill level, right? Obviously, as a beginner, you're going to be less skilled, less fluent in the movements. So you might see that as some shakiness or inconsistencies in form. But the good thing that comes along with this is the beginner is going to have easier adaptations and they're going to adapt from way less stimulus in their training than the advanced lifter, right? The advanced lifter is going to have to, we use the word grind, right? People throw that around, but essentially work harder for longer for less progress. So this may sound like a negative, but it's ultimately a positive. If you're a beginner, you have a lot of room for improvement, which is a great thing, right? So with this easier adaptation response, you don't necessarily have to push that progressive overload as quickly as a beginner. I think a lot of people want fast results, so they progress the weights or the reps really fast in pursuit of getting stronger. But in reality, this beginner could probably do the same reps and not use that principle of progressive overload as much and still make progress as their body is getting more skilled at the movement, right? They're getting better at squatting, better at benching, better at deadlifting, better at playing football, whatever it may be, just by going through those motions. Then lastly, as a beginner, you're going to have quicker recovery, generally speaking, because the beginner is usually not going to be handling as much weight. They're not going to have as much stress on their body. So their recovery time can be faster and faster. And they can usually do a little bit more, right, without getting injured. So that's another plus to being a beginner. Now, moving over here to the advanced side of things, right, we get the opposite. Usually you're more skilled in the movement. And advanced lifters have often developed a higher work capacity. And what I mean by work capacity is simply the ability to handle stress on the body. So if you think about me, I may deadlift heavy 3 times a week, squat heavy 3 times a week at times, bench 3 or 4 times a week. This is a great example of how I've accumulated the work capacity over 9 years of consistently powerlifting and competing. And then before that, I was in the gym for 5 to 6 years in high school and middle school, right, for football. So I've had a lot of time to develop work capacity. And this is maybe the number one reason that you shouldn't just look online and see what your favorite high-level powerlifter is doing and copy them, because chances are they have built a different level of work capacity than you, right? And for some people, maybe you've got a higher work capacity than me and you need to do more. But other people, deadlifting 3 times a week would shatter them and lead to injuries. So this is the big takeaway here. Your work capacity will increase over time so you can do more. Now with that, as an advanced lifter, you're going to have to manage fatigue way more diligently than a beginner would have to, because you're handling those heavier weights, often for more reps or more volume, because progressive overload has naturally taken you there over time. That can lead to injury, right? So you have to manage that fatigue, and that progressive overload tends to be less linear and more of ups and downs, because you have to progress forward and then give your body a break, and we might call that a deload, and then push forward again. And you get these undulations, and it comes back to, hey, the advanced lifters handling a lot of stress on their body, and we have to manage that fatigue. Okay, so hopefully that clears up kind of the nuance between beginner and advanced. We'll move on to specificity now, and then we'll wrap things up. So the last thing for this episode is we're going to look into specificity. So we already covered, hey, how do we progressively overload to make our body adapt to this higher stimulus and hopefully get stronger or faster or whatever you're trying to do. Specificity is basically the other side to this. So basically, the higher the specificity, the more specific the exercise will be to your sport, right? So I have an example here, and I've created just this quick kind of graph where we've got less specific and more specific up here as a power lifter, right? And in powerlifting, we do a flat paused bench in competition. So a less specific exercise would be the tricep extension, right? It works the triceps just like the bench, but it really is not a pressing movement. So it may help, but it is not very specific to pause bench pressing. Now, as we move up, we hit the incline bench, which is a little more specific, right? You are actually pressing something. You're using the same muscles as a paused bench press. So it is more specific than a tricep extension, but it is still not the most specific thing, which all the way up here, that would be actually practicing a paused bench. So that's kind of the idea of specificity. Another example I've heard is like a high school football player versus an NFL football player. Some high school football players will get better from lifting weights in the gym. That's not very specific, right? They're not playing football. They're just getting stronger to apply to the field. The NFL player is probably not going to increase their level of play a whole lot from lifting weights, right? They're going to maintain their body that way, but they're not going to increase their play by a whole lot that way. Instead, they need to be more specific and spend more time on the field doing drills in game scenarios to actually get better. And that goes with this idea that as experience goes up, specificity in your program also needs to go up, right? Because as you adapt with that progressive overload, your body is going to need more specific stimulus in order to progress, right? So just like the high school football player, a beginner can do a lot of tricep extensions, incline benches, chest flies, and by doing that, and doing that alone, they can increase their bench press. Whereas a more advanced lifter, these may be a little more negligible, and they have to spend more time actually doing their specific lift, right? So specificity is the other side to the coin, where you have to balance how experienced you are and how much you focus exactly on your lifts at hand. So, all right, going to close things up there. Hopefully that answers some questions on progressive overload and specificity in training. If you like the video, please like, subscribe, comment, anything down below. Looking to keep these going. So thanks for your time and see you next time.